We have been going through the book of Revelation, and we are almost finished. We actually finished the book, but then we never went through the first three chapters, so we're in the process of doing that now. Last week we went back to chapter 1, and then we'll have 2 and 3, and then we'll be finished for real this time. So last week we were looking at the introduction to the book, the first few verses, and we're just going to continue from there and take it verse by verse as we have been doing. All right, so Revelation chapter 1. All right, so as we saw last week, in the first part of the book here, we are given a background to what is happening. Where did John get this message from? He says it was the revelation of Jesus given to him by his Father, and he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John. So we see a chain of delivery from the Father to the Son, to the angel to John, and then through John to us. We also looked at the fact that it was said that this book was to be given to the 7 churches. And we'll look at that a little more closely, probably a little later on today, because what we saw was that these 7 churches were actually 7 literal locations in what we call Asia Minor. And so these letters were to literally go to this letter was to literally go to the 7 churches. But we also saw that there is good reason why we believe that the message has a greater application than just to 7 literal churches. We believe it applies to the Church of God right down through the ages, and especially to those who live in the last days, because that's what Revelation is focused on. We also saw that there are a few verses here that are often misunderstood as referring to the Trinity, or misrepresented. People say that verse 8 is referring to Jesus speaking. The red letter suggests that it is Jesus speaking. But we also saw that there is a misrepresentation here, because it is focused, it's supposed to be a statement. It says it's a statement from the Almighty, from the one which is, which was, and which is to come. And that clearly is not Jesus. We see that in Revelation, the Almighty is the Father. The one which is, which was, and which is to come is the Father. None of those 2 titles apply to Jesus. So we saw also that when it says that John was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, there's a lot of controversy about what this Lord's Day means. And people say it means a Sabbath, and another set of people say it means Sunday. But based on the context of the book, based on the message of the book, we came to the conclusion that it's not really speaking about a literal day, but it's speaking about the day of the Lord. If you think about that period of time referred to as the day of the Lord in the Bible, it's very strongly expressed in the way that you see the book of Revelation expressed. It's a day of tribulation and trouble, and when God intervenes again in the affairs of men, and there's hailstone, and there's fire, and there's a lot of confusion and all kinds of things. This is the day of the Lord. And so it seems to us that from the context of it, this is the better understanding of that statement. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. I was in the Spirit. Through the Spirit, I came to be taken down to the day of the Lord. That's how I am interpreting it. All right, so we came down to verse 12, which is about where John hears this voice that says, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. What you see, write in a book. Send it to the 7 churches. We looked at that verse last week, and then we stopped there. So in verse 12, John says, And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. So apparently he hears the voice behind him. And he turns around. And he, he, he's in a vision. He says, I was in the spirit. Now let me just pause a little bit and say something about this statement, I was in the spirit, before I go any further. Back to verse 10. We are going back a little bit to what we touched on last week. He said, I was in the spirit. Now, the reason why I go back to this phrase is because people use this phrase today. And what they mean is that they get into you know, they get into a state of mental frenzy. People say they get into the spirit and then they fall on the ground, or they get into the spirit and then they roll about, or they start to leap in the air. They understand it to mean that I begin to behave in an extraordinary, energetic way. That's what they think, right? You see somebody suddenly start to shout and say, Jesus, Jesus, and wave their hands, and you say, she got into the spirit, he got into the spirit. That's how people understand the phrase today. When I look at the Bible, it's interesting because you have the phrase, you have several phrases that relate to a person's experience in the spirit. For example, the Bible says that Samson was on the way down to Timnath, I think it was, and a young lion roared at him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion like he would have torn a kid. So when it says the Spirit came upon him, what it did was, it didn't mean that he began to jump about and to speak in tongues or anything. It simply means that he was filled with supernatural power. He was filled with supernatural energy. That's what it means in this context when it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. You'll also find where it says the Spirit of the Lord comes upon people and they begin to prophesy. So what it means is that the power of God, the ability of God comes upon the person, and he begins to say and to do things that he cannot normally say or do. So you have the other expression here now where instead of saying the Spirit of God comes upon a person, it says the person is in the Spirit. It might mean similar, but it's expressed a little differently. So John says, I was in the Spirit. And what does John mean by this phrase? If you think he starts to jump about and to speak in tongues, you'd be very confused and mistaken, because that is not what it is saying at all. I was in the Spirit, and to be in the Spirit means that I was wrapped up in the power of the Spirit. I was in the environment of the Holy Spirit. And to be in that environment, what it means is that you are taken out of the physical realm. You are taken into a place where you are seeing things and hearing things which you cannot see or hear normally or experience normally. It means that through the Spirit of God, you are taken into an environment out of where you are physically, and you are taken into another realm. Whether it's just in your mind or in your body, you can't always tell. Paul says, um, let me just show you one place where the Apostle Paul speaks about being in the Spirit. Um, it's in 2 Corinthians. Yeah, if he might not actually use the word, but here is somebody who was in the Spirit, right? Look at what he says. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago. Whether in the body, I cannot tell, or whether out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth. Such a man, such a one was caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth. How that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Now they say that in this phrase, Paul was referring to himself. And I believe that is so. But the point I want to make is that look at what he says. He says, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. Whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knows. And what does this tell me? It tells me that when you are caught up in the spirit, it is so real that you have a difficulty in knowing whether it is a vision or a literal experience. You remember when Peter was in prison and the angel came to release him out of prison. He says that the angel came and hit him on his side and said, "Get up, follow me." And as they began to walk through the prison, the doors began to open by their own accord. In front of them, the doors just opened and they went through the door. And when they were actually got outside now, the angel disappeared. And then Peter realized that it was not a vision. Because up to this point, he thought it was a vision. And so, what is the point I'm making? The point I'm making is that sometimes I hear people say, "I had a vision last night." And really, what they mean is that they had a dream. Because a dream is kind of very, in a dream, you are half aware of what is happening. But everything is vague and nebulous. That's a dream. Furthermore, a dream happens when you are sleeping. But a vision often happens when you're awake. The difference between a dream and a vision is that in a vision, you don't know the difference between the vision and real life. You can't tell because a vision is so clear that it is only afterwards maybe that you realize that it is a vision that you're having. This is what Paul says. I was caught up to Christ, and I can't tell you whether it was in the body or out of the body. I don't know whether I actually went to heaven in my body or whether it was out of my body in my spirit. So this is what it means when a person is in the spirit. It means that you are wrapped up in the environment of the spirit in such a way that you can hardly tell the difference whether it is literal life or whether you're actually seeing something happening in your head. So, today they are talking about something that is called a hologram. You have different ways in which you can get information. You can read a book, you can listen to somebody speaking, you can listen to an audio tape, or you can watch a video, which is probably the most graphic thing of all. But now they are moving to another realm where they are talking about holograms, where actually you actually see the thing happening around you in 3 dimension. They are getting to the place where you can actually be in the movie itself. Now you can sit down and watch it on the screen, okay? But they have some movies that are made in such a way that you put on what they call 3D glasses, and you actually see the thing like it's something you can touch, like it's 3D. You can tell that a movie is, flat, but in a hologram or in a 3D movie, you actually seem to be able to be in the thing with the thing happening around you. And they have it actually where now you can have it 360 degrees. You can turn and see behind you. You have on these glasses. The next thing that they are trying to work on is creating holograms where the shape of the thing, you can see a man here, you can see a man beside you, you can see somebody behind you, you can see trees all around you, and you are in the middle of it, and it's not real. It's a mirage. It's a hologram created environment, but it looks exactly like real, except that you cannot touch it. This is where they are going with technology. But it's something like this that John is seeing. It's something like this that God brings to John. He hears the voice, and he's in the spirit, so he's out of his bodily environment. He no longer sees the Isle of Patmos. He now finds himself in a different place because he looks behind him and he hears a voice and he turns around. And when he looks, the first thing he sees, he says, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. Where are these candlesticks? Are they on the Isle of Patmos? Not at all. Are they in the mind of John? Maybe. Are they some kind of hologram that God creates? I mean, I'm using the word hologram because I want us to get the idea. But John actually sees 3D, right? He sees 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. So, I want to make the point that wherever this is, it's not on the Isle of Patmos. It's something that God has brought to the mind of John. He presents it to John. So everything we're looking at here is God's representation. It's not literal life on the Isle of Patmos. If you went to the Isle of Patmos, and if you were not John, you could have walked through that area. You would not have seen 7 candlesticks. You would not have seen Jesus standing there. It's a vision. It's like a hologram, but it is so real that, as we pointed out, when you're having a vision, you don't know the difference between reality and the representation. Now, because it's a vision, you can't take anything for granted, especially because it's a vision of the book of Revelation. What you have to understand is that everything that is presented to you right here, it's created by God. In other words, when somebody makes a movie or when somebody writes a book, let me use writing because, well, movie, everybody understands a movie, all right? When you make a movie, you have somebody called a director, and you have the actors, and everything that happens is put in the movie by the director and by the writer of the story because they want you to think in a certain way. So if you are watching a movie, for example, and you see a black cat walk across the road, it's different than if you're driving your car down the road and you see a black cat walk across the road. If you see a black cat walk across the road in real life, you think, there goes a cat, unless you are superstitious, right? But if you see a black cat walk across the road in a movie, you know that the person who wrote that movie made the cat walk across at that point because he's trying to say something to you, right? He wants you to think a certain way. So you are thinking, what does that black cat mean? And if you see a woman walking on a lonely road in real life, you just think that woman needs to be careful. But if you see it in a movie, you figure something is about to happen to that woman because the director of the movie wants to send a message to you. That's why he put this picture in front of your face. All right, I'm sure everybody can understand that. So, as we come to the book of Revelation, what you are seeing in the vision is what God puts before your face because God wants you to think a certain way. So, this does not mean that in heaven Jesus is walking among 7 candlesticks. It does not necessarily mean that in heaven Jesus has hairs white like wool, his eyes are like a flame of fire. It does not mean this. Now, I'm not saying some of this may not be literally true. That's not the point I'm making, right? If it is literally true, maybe, right? But I'm saying because I see this here, I would not say it means it is literally so. I would say, what is the message that God is trying to give me by putting this picture before my eyes? I hope you can all follow what I'm trying to say. I'm very anxious that I don't leave you behind in terms of how I'm thinking as I'm looking at this. So, this is why we are justified in looking at this picture and trying to pick it apart and say, what kind of message, what is God trying to say here? Now, we know that these 7 golden candlesticks, what they represent, because later on, this is what Jesus says in just a moment. The 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. So right away we know These are not real candlesticks. These are not real candlesticks. These represent the seven churches. And the seven churches are Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Philadelphia, Sardis, Laodicea. All right, we know that the seven churches are real churches, but God does not present them as churches. What he presents them as is seven golden candlesticks. So this is why I say Jesus is not literally walking in the middle of candlesticks. What this message is what this vision is saying is that Jesus is in the presence of the church. Okay, the church is represented in seven phases or seven aspects of it, seven churches. But it represents the church of God, and Jesus is walking in the midst of it. What it is saying is that the church of Christ is not abandoned. Jesus is there in the middle of the church. And instead of, I mean, how does Jesus walk among the churches? Because, for example, in our fellowship this evening, we are a part of the church. We don't expect that Jesus is literally, walking on foot, that his feet are, just a second, I need to mute. We don't think that his feet are actually walking on a literal location, but the vision represents the fact that Jesus is present in the church. So when you walk somewhere, it means that your presence is constantly there. The Bible says you should walk uprightly. It uses the word walk to represent your manner of living, your lifestyle. So when Jesus is said to be walking in the midst of the candlesticks, it means that this is Jesus' lifestyle. He lives in the church. His presence is there. This is what John sees. He sees Jesus clothed with a garment down to his foot. He has on a long robe. I don't know what meaning I could put to that. I would just say that he has to be clothed in some way, and this is how it is represented. He has a golden girdle, a golden belt around his waist. And again, what I would think about this, maybe just off the top of my head, I would say that, the Apostle Paul represents, in Ephesians, he represents us having on the armor of God. And he talks about your loins should be girt about with truth, and you have on the breastplate of righteousness. And he goes on to describe the kind of armor that you should have on as a Christian. And I would look at what Jesus is wearing in a similar way. Because I don't know if the Bible is saying, is God saying in heaven, Jesus has a golden cord around his waist? Maybe. Maybe in heaven, he ties a cord around his waist. Maybe the angels have cords tied around their waist. Maybe. Who am I to say it is not so? But we would not be out of place if we are trying to look for another meaning or an additional meaning in the description here. Because John is very detailed. He tells you how he's dressed, what he's wearing, every detail of his appearance. And you have to think that he is allowed, he's enabled to take special notice of what he's seeing, to remember the details, because maybe there is some spiritual implication to what he's seeing. For example, his head and his hair white as snow, white like wool, as white as snow. Is there some meaning to that? Because in the Bible, when it talks about something being white as snow or whiter than snow, it actually refers to a state of purity, right? Um, Wash me, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. So the fact that he has a white head and white hair, to me, it signifies not that Jesus in heaven. It's not telling you the skin color of Jesus. I know there are some people, notedly people of my race. You have a lot of them who they have a racial emphasis when it comes to the Bible. There's a backlash against the fact that so many atrocities have taken place in the name of Christianity. For many years, people who enslaved black people happened to be Christians. They were Christians and they had slaves, and they actually enforced slavery using Christianity as an excuse. They say that the Bible justified slavery. And you have a kind of backlash among some black people today. Some of them are claiming to be the real Hebrews. Some of them are claiming that Jesus was a black man. And they're looking for some way to bring racial identity into religion. I personally am completely disgusted with that kind of thing. I'm disgusted with it because I don't believe racism, any kind of racism, has anything to do with God or to do with Christianity. I believe that in Christ, those things disappear. You know, I believe that human beings have been cruel to human beings. It happened to be that black people have been the subject of a great deal of disadvantage over the centuries. And the people who did it, one day they will stand before God and be judged for it. But I think it is absolutely stupid for people to look at this and say, because of this, one race should be negative towards another race, because it was humanity. It was humanity that has the advantage over other human beings. I look at society today and I see rich white people take advantage of poor white people and poor black people. I see rich black people take advantage of poor black people. And I see people like me without Christ. They do the most stupid and the most wicked things. I've done it myself. I've taken advantage of people before I knew better. So it's a human thing, and we don't solve it by trying to approach life on the basis of race. So the idea, they say Jesus, his hair is like wool. All right, that's like black hair, white. And they say his feet are like
Love it.
brass, as if they burn in a furnace, because they say, brass is kind of brownish, so it more suits the color of black people. But it's stupid to try to find this in the Bible and to force a meaning like this into the Bible, because black skin is not like brass burning in a fire. No way. And that's not what God is saying. Somebody was saying something?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I wonder if the white here represents wisdom due to age. People hoary head. The Bible speaks about people have hoary head, which means gray or white hair, showing that they're mature and full of wisdom, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, the best we can say about it is possibly that's what it indicates. We notice that God the Father is referred to as the Ancient of Days. So there's an emphasis on his age. And Jesus, as his son, inherits the attributes of his father. So it's not strange to find that his hair, in Daniel chapter 7, it says of God, the Ancient of Days, whose garment was white as snow and his hair like wool. I think it's the same kind of similar description. So his son looks like him, and I agree with you that there's an emphasis on God's timelessness, on God's eternity, when he's called the Ancient of Days, and he's represented as having this white hair, because white hair is a symbol of age, which is associated with wisdom. So maybe this is one of the reasons why in the Bible, in the visions, God is represented with this white hair. Um, anyway, he's girt about the paps with a golden girdle. I know that gold is used in the message to Laodicea. It says, I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire. And gold is used there to represent faith and love. Gold, faith and love that is tried in the fire. God wants his people to have. You know, white raiment, righteousness of Christ. The white raiment represents righteousness. So anyway, probably we could go through and find a different implication for each item that we see here. But it's one of those things that we have to just kind of draw our implication and leave it alone, because we might even have disagreements in some cases of what does this mean, what does that mean. But Generally speaking, I would say that the description we see is referring to the attributes of Jesus, not necessarily to the way Jesus looks in heaven, but to the attributes of heaven, the qualities that he possesses, the character qualities. So maybe we can leave it at that. So I want to repeat that. I would say that the appearance of Jesus, like if I appeared to you in a dream, and if God showed me to you in a dream, and I was dressed in black, if God gave you this dream, when you see me on the road tomorrow, you would not expect to see me dressed in black. You would say, God showed me you dressed in black. You could assume it either means one of two things. Either it means that I'm going to die, or it means that I have a bad character, right? Um, I know that anyway, the point I'm making is that usually the outward appearance in a dream or a vision, it represents some character qualities. So we could leave it at that. His feet like fine brass as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Um, his eyes as a flame of fire. When he's seen coming in the book of Revelation, his eyes are like a flame of fire, and he has a sword in his mouth. Everything is representative. Everything is talking about some quality that is in him or some work that he's going to do. Verse 16, and he had in his right hand 7 stars. Now again, down at the bottom it says that these 7 stars, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. This is the first chapter of the book of Revelation, and right at the beginning we are told that angels, do not necessarily mean literal angels, because it says there are 7 stars, and these are the angels of the 7 churches. And you can be sure that these angels do not represent literal angels, and I'll show you why. Look at look at chapter 2. The message to the churches begins like this: unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write. So the message is addressed to the angel. And God says to the angel, I know your works, your labor, your patience, how you cannot bear those which are evil. You have tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. But look what it says a little further down. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. This is not speaking to an angel. It's not speaking to an angel. It's speaking to people. So what I mean is, you can see then that the angel of the 7 churches, the angel is not a literal angel. It represents the leadership of the church, those that are called to be in the forefront of the movement. And I suppose it applies to everybody who is a part of the church. Okay? So
So,
what do
Brother
we see
E,
here? You want to say
Brother D,
something, Nikki?
yeah, I wanted to say that if this is the verse why some so-called Christians believe that all of us were once like angels that were falling unto the earth and all of this.
I would say it's possible, but I can't say yes or no, because I'm not really aware of where they get that doctrine from. I would say that possibly this might contribute to it. Maybe there are some people who believe that, but this is certainly one of the verses from which we get the idea that angels represent primarily messengers. In the book of Revelation, where you see an angel, don't assume that it means a being from heaven. Many times it represents God's people carrying on the work of God. For example, in Revelation 14, where John says, I saw another angel fly through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach. It's not a literal angel, it's God's people. It's people who belong to the church of God. So we know that right here we see the evidence. The angel represents God's people. So many times when you see an angel in Revelation 18, I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven. He cries with a loud voice, Babylon is fallen, come out of her, my people. Not a literal angel, but a message carried by the messengers of God. Angels have not been given the gospel to preach. It's people who have been given this gospel. So God's people are the angels in this sense. In this sense. So the seven stars are the messengers of the seven churches. Now I'm going to make another point here, which I think is important. It relates to something that I've heard said. I don't know if the rest of us will remember, but we have had this discussion when we were going through the book of Revelation. Now, here you have something, a symbol, the seven stars. The seven stars are, what do you expect next? You expect to be given the interpretation of the symbol. The seven stars are angels. You would say, all right, we have been given the symbol, which is the seven stars. We have been given the interpretation, which is the angels. But no, no, no. Here is a case in Revelation where you have a symbol, which means another symbol, and then finally you have to interpret the second symbol to get what it really means. I know that not everybody will remember why I'm saying this or understand why I'm saying this, but I've heard it said that once you have a symbol and the book of Revelation interprets the symbol, you should not give another meaning to that symbol. Some of you might remember that we have had this discussion before. But here is one case that is very clear that you have a symbol which is interpreted to be a second symbol, which you have to again interpret to get the true meaning. So you have a symbol which means another symbol, and then you go to the third stage to get the meaning. Now, this happens in Revelation in several places. And I'm thankful that I found this because I've been looking for a place where you can actually prove this from the book of Revelation. Revelation is a complex book. It has different layers, and sometimes God says this means this, and it seems logical that if God gives you the interpretation, God says a star means an angel. That's the interpretation. You should stop there and say, okay, we're talking about angels. But in this case, we're not talking about angels because the next chapter shows you that it's not angels, it's people. So I think that's one case where you can see that this happens sometimes in Revelation. One thing means something else, and you still have to reinterpret that to mean to get the true meaning. All right, some of us, I mean, that I know that will pass you by because you might not figure out why is this important. But there are places in Revelation where it comes up. Um, so he has in his right hand seven stars, and we are told that these seven stars are the seven angels, and we see that the seven angels are the people in the church, in particular those who lead out in the church, because they are the ones who are credited for the condition of the church, or they are blamed for the condition of the church. Now, notice what it says about Jesus. It says he's walking in the church. He's present in the church. And the ministers of the church, the leaders of the church, he has them in the palm of his hand. It's a beautiful illustration because what it shows us is that it reinforces the idea that Jesus is always with his people. It reinforces what he says, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. It reinforces it, right? He's walking in the church and he has the people of the church in his hands. You can't get closer than this. I mean, the only way you could get closer is if you could find a way to represent Jesus is living in you. And I suppose to do this, John would have to have a vision of himself, of his inside, and to see Jesus living inside. But this is the closest he can go from an outside vision. He's walking in the church. He has the seven stars in his hand. Now, let me explain something. There is Let me talk about this about Seventh Day Adventists, and the reason is because, of course, most of us have an Adventist background, and a lot of what we believe about Revelation is based on our Adventist teaching. Now, Adventists believe that the seventh church, Laodicea, they believe that the seventh church is a Seventh Day Adventist church. If you have been an Adventist, you know this. Adventists believe that the seventh church is a Seventh Day Adventist church. The only problem is the Adventist church is not a church, it's a denomination. I would like you to get that distinction. The Seventh Day Adventist church is not a church in the biblical sense, it's a denomination. In the biblical sense, what is a church? Because in the biblical sense, a church is, you have two definitions for a church. Two definitions. First of all, a church is a local congregation. Like you have the church in Chloe's house. You have the church in the house of Aquila and Priscilla. You have the church at Ephesus. You have the church at such and such a place. A church is a local congregation. And the second definition of the church is that there are only two churches. There's the church of God, and there's a great false church that is called Babylon. In God's understanding of church, these are the only definitions of church. Number one, it can be a local congregation. Number two, it is the great body of believers that is called Christians. And in that same context, it can be the great body of false believers that are called Babylon. So denominations are not understood to be churches in the Bible. Let me repeat that. We have a misconstrued idea in our mind because we have been born and we grew up in a system where you talk about the Baptist church, the Methodist church, the Wesleyan church, the Presbyterian, the Lutheran, the Adventist, the Pentecostal. We are used to labeling divisions in the church as a church, but it is not biblical. According to the biblical definition, the Adventist church is not a church as God would recognize a church. It's a denomination, and the best you can say about a denomination is that it's a section of the Christian church. It's a division within the Christian church. It's a kind of ministry. That's the best you can say about these denominations. Now, why am I making this point? When you see the seven churches here in Revelation, we're not talking about seven denominations. You know that well. All of us know that. Because you'd ask, which denominations are we talking about? Adventists have spoiled up the picture by saying that we are church number 7. They have made themselves into one complete age of the church. Whereas in all of these 7 expressions of the church, we are not talking about any denomination. We are talking about the church of Christ in a particular period of time. When you think that the Laodicean church is the Seventh-day Adventist church, what you have done, you have eliminated all other Christians from the church of God. That is what this false idea does. Now, when we come to chapter 2, I will comment on this a little bit more, but I just want to plant that idea in our minds first of all. So when it says that Jesus has the messengers of the seven of the churches in his hand, if you're an Adventist or if you think like an Adventist, you will say, you see, Jesus is preserving the ministry of Adventism. Do you see where you go with this, right? Jesus is specially preserving the ministry, the ministers of the Adventist church. Jesus is keeping them, and so they are specially guided and directed by the Spirit of God. And this is a part of the whole narrative that says that if you want to be saved, if you want to be a part of God's church, you have to belong to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. That is what leads you to that conclusion, the idea that the Adventist church is 1/7 of these 7 churches. If this is true, if this were true, if I believed this, I would be justified in remaining in the Adventist church. There are many people who are dissatisfied with the condition of the church. They are dissatisfied with what, even a lot of people who believe the truth about God. They are concerned about the fact that the Adventist church is Trinitarian, but they stay connected to it because they say it is God's true church. It is church number 7, and the church and God only recognized 7 churches from Ephesus to Laodicea. And if Laodicea is Adventism, even though it is in a wretched state, it is still God's church. It is one of the 7, and to be saved, I must be associated with it. And if you buy into that idea, then it makes sense. If you buy into the idea that the Laodicean church means the Adventist church exclusively, the Adventist denomination, then it makes sense that you stick with the Adventist church. So I hope you can understand what I'm saying.
Brother David,
Yes, Nikki, go ahead.
you said that the 7 stars represent the 7 churches of the end time.
No, I said that the 7 candlesticks represented the 7 churches, and I didn't say the end time.
Which 7 churches you represent?
Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and
Or
Laodicea.
actual churches that were around that time?
They were actual churches around at that time, but I'm saying that there is a greater meaning to it, which we are going to come to as soon as we come to chapter 2.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. John says, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And I can understand that. Even though Jesus is my brother, my friend, and God is my father and my friend, and I love them and I'm comfortable with them. I think if it's just a human reaction, if you ever see Jesus in his glorified state, if you see somebody looking at like this, you're going to drop down like you're dead. Not because you plan to do it, but just overwhelmed. I remember one morning I was praying. Okay, a few years ago I was praying and I was asking the Lord to fill me with His Spirit. All right, I was praying for a certain spiritual gifts, and I was praying, and in the dark I lifted up my hand and I said, Father, please touch me now. And while I had my hands lifted up, it came to my mind, what if God touches you? And I pulled out my hand because the thought of being touched in the dark, it was a frightening thought. The thought that, it was a revelation to me because you want something and you are scared of it. Because to be touched in a supernatural way, as somebody who has never encountered God on a physical level, if you see Him, you will drop like you're dead. You lose in the sight of that. It just has a reaction on you. And you can't help yourself. You go down on your face, you fall down, you're immovable, you don't know what to do. You just go down and you just I remember once I had a dream. I've had 2 significant dreams. This was the second one, but I dreamed that I woke up in the middle of a dark room. In my dream I woke up. I just came to consciousness and everywhere was dark. And I realized that I was in some kind of dark place and I saw like light coming under a door. And so and so I pushed the door, and when I stepped outside, it's like I stepped out into a world that had been destroyed by an atomic warfare. Everything was devastated. All the buildings were covered with gray dust, and it was just wrecks of buildings. There was not a sign of life. Nobody was left alive. It was just a long road, like a street in a city, but it went way down till I couldn't see the end of the street. But everywhere was just gray and covered with this dust. And I stood there and I didn't know what to do because nothing was moving, nothing was alive. I was the only person left alive in this place. And this was a little bit after I became a Christian, like a year or two afterwards. And while I was looking, I saw a little light, a flash of light way down at the bottom of the road, the bottom of the street. And as I was looking, I saw the light begin to move towards me like an airplane coming at full speed. And as it came closer, I saw that it was an angel, and he had a sword in his hand, and he was coming to me with the sword. And in the dream, I knew what was about to happen. In the dream, I knew that I was on a planet where the people had destroyed themselves. I knew that there had been a great war and people had destroyed themselves. Everybody was dead, and I was the only one left alive. And the angel was coming with a sword to destroy me because I was the last remaining person out of this wicked race. And the angel was coming to just finish the job and wipe me out because my race could not be allowed to live. And, in that moment, in my dream, you know what I did? I just fell down and closed my eyes and waited for the stroke. I just waited for the blow to hit me because I knew that I have no excuse. I knew that I was not fit to live. I knew that every one of us, we human beings, we had no right to live. And so I fell on my face. I could not speak a word. I could not say anything. I could not cry for mercy. I just fell down and I waited for the stroke and I waited for the death. It was an amazing dream because while I was lying there with my eyes closed and waiting for the death stroke, I heard music. I heard music, and I opened my eyes. When I opened my eyes, everywhere was green. I was on a field, a kind of slope, a little slope, like a little hill. Everything was green. The grass was beautifully green, and at the top of the hill, I could see I could see a light coming from behind the hill, like the sun was rising on the other side, and it was just shining. It was like in the morning, and the sunlight was shining over the hill, and just coming. The rays were going up in the air, and I was in this beautiful place, and I was alive, and the angel was gone, and the wreckage was gone, and I was hearing this beautiful music, and I knew that I had been forgiven. I knew that I had been given another chance and I was given a new beginning. So it was a dream. I kind of get a little bit carried away because the main point I wanted to make, the point I wanted to make was that when I saw the angel coming and about to destroy me, I just fell on my face like somebody did. I could not make make a sound or make an excuse or say anything. In the light of a heavenly being, in the purity and the glory of a heavenly being, much more if it is Jesus, all you can do is fall down as if you are dead. What else can you do? So anyway,
Can I ask a question, David?
sure, Nikki, go ahead.
Can we go back to verse 16 and can you comment on the part that says, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, please?
Yes. Okay. Now this sharp two-edged sword also appears in Revelation chapter 19. If I may go there and just Revelation 19. It says, and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations. Now we see the sword here in chapter 1. Sorry. We see the sword in chapter 1, and we see the sword here in chapter 19. In chapter 1, the sword is not represented here as an agent of destruction, but in Revelation 19, it is represented as an agent of destruction. With it he will smite the nations. But when you look at it in chapter 1, it's just a part of a general description. And so what we understand about this sword, you have to go to the book of Hebrews where it says that the word of the Lord is like a sharp sword that pierces even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, of body and spirit. So the sword here represents the word of God. It's an agency that will be used to destroy the nations. But here in Revelation chapter 1, I think it simply represents the power of the word of God to cut and to divide and to sort and to sift. It does the work of in our case, Paul says it is able to divide between body and spirit. In other words, it can reach down into your soul and it can separate between the spiritual and the physical. It can the word of God helps us to understand and to sort out the priorities in our lives. It helps us to determine how our lives should be lived. So it's a sword in the sense that it divides and it separates. But it's also a sword because there is power in that word, and that is the word that will smite and destroy the nations. So that would be my comment on it, Nikki.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Um, so John falls down, and of course Jesus, always gentle, always reassuring to his people. It says he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, "Fear not, don't be afraid. I'm the first and the last." And again, we want to emphasize that when he says, "I'm the first and the last," in the context of salvation, he's the first and the last. In where is it? In Hebrews chapter 12, is it? I think it's Hebrews chapter 12. It says that we should in verse 2. It says, "Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith." So there you have the idea that Jesus is the one who starts. He's the author. He's the one who starts the journey. He's the originator, and he's the finisher of our faith. You can think of this in the context of where the Bible says, "He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it." He's able to complete that good work. So we look unto Jesus, who is the beginner and the finisher. And so in terms of our salvation, in terms of the human experience of salvation, Jesus is the first and he's the last. It does not mean that he's the first as the Father is the first, the originator of all things. But it means in the context of the human history, Jesus is the first. He is the beginning of the story. In the Christian church, he is the first one to raise from the dead. He's the first one to be born again. He's the first one to be raised to eternal life. And he's the last one because nobody after him will ever come who will fulfill that role. He's the first one who ever experienced it, and he's the last one who ever experienced it. So there are many ways in which it can be said Jesus is the first and the last.
Can I ask you
And
a question?
yes, Brother Tony.
So in verse 11, when it's talking about I am the Alpha and Omega, that's reference to Jesus also, right?
Yes, I believe Jesus
So,
carries this title as well.
so we see some places it's reference to the Father and it's reference to Jesus also, because everything that the Father has, Jesus has, right?
Yes, you know, God has given all authority and all power unto His Son, and we know that Jesus is the one who created all things, because it says
Right,
so in John 1 and verse 1. All things were made by Him. In Ephesians 3 and verse 9, it says that God created all things by Jesus Christ. So,
right, right,
as you say, all that God has, He has given to His Son, except that He always remains above Him in authority. And we have to add, in age, he has to be older than his son, otherwise he's not his father.
right, right. Okay.
Um, so I love this phrase. Verse 18 is special, and it's special to me because I I never understood it until a few years ago when I came to understand that Jesus had to die in order for there to be a resurrection. It seems a simple thing, but it's when I started to understand righteousness by faith I began to understand this. And the reason why it became such a momentous thing is because when I started to understand this, I was strongly opposed by many people in the one true God movement. I never understood that there was such ignorance about it. People kind of took it for granted that everybody is to be resurrected, but I didn't realize nobody was entitled to be resurrected unless Jesus was resurrected. He had to be raised from the dead. Otherwise, nobody who died could be saved. This is why it says, look at what it says in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 21. Look at this and tell me, and look at what it is saying. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. There was no resurrection to eternal life. I mean, you know that Elijah raised a boy from the dead, and so did Elisha. But when they raised them from the dead, they only came back for a few days, a few years, and then they died again, right? It was simply like somebody was healed of sickness. And even Lazarus, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, but it's just like he was raised from sickness. He lived a while and then he died again. Nobody ever came back to eternal life until Jesus was raised from the dead. That's why I say even Moses was raised from the dead to long life, not eternal life. Moses was subject to death again. He was going to die again unless Jesus was raised from the dead, because God had no title over the dead. God had no title over hell until Jesus conquered the grave, until Jesus died. Satan let in somebody into hell. He took somebody into, well, let me say hell, but we mean the grave. Satan took somebody into the grave who did not belong there. He was not qualified for the grave. The grave, death is for sinners. Death is for sinners. God made Jesus to be sin so that he could die. The plan of salvation is amazing. He made Jesus to be sin who knew no sin. So because he was made to be sin, he went into the grave. He died. He entered death. And because he was not qualified to be there, he had to be let out. And when he broke out, he says, I have the keys. I carry the keys with me. It's like an amazing story. They found a way to break into Satan's domain and come out with the key so that Satan loses all power over death. But it says, we understand that through Jesus, we have salvation from sin. All right? How did Jesus save us from sin? He saved us from sin because he, 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 he died to sin. And so because he died to sin, when he gives me his life, in my life now, there is this element of death to sin. I can overcome sin because the life in me has already obtained the victory over sin. This is the beauty of the gospel. The gospel is Jesus did it and he gives it to you. That's the gospel. I used to think the gospel is Jesus did it and he helps you to do it. Jesus did it and so he helps you to do it. So you copy what Jesus did. That is not the gospel. The good news is Jesus did it and I inherit it. That's why he's the second Adam. He did it, I inherit it. By faith I receive it, and because I receive it by faith, the power is in me, the ability is in me. I can do it because I have the life in me that already conquered sin. The Christian life is about it is already done. It's not something to be done. It is what is already done in Jesus Christ. That is Christianity. So
Amen.
then because those who lived in the realm of the dead, they died without having this life of Christ, because this life was not available until Jesus conquered sin. He had to live this life and conquer sin. He had to overcome, and then this life is available. And they died without it.
Brother David,
I
that's
hear you,
the
Brother Sam.
news.
What's that,
That's
Brother Sam?
the news.
That's the good news. Thank you. That is the good news. That's the
But
good news.
David,
Yes,
David,
Nikki. Yes, Nikki.
there's a text, I can't remember where it is, which made reference to Jesus being Lord of the dead and the living, is there? Or
It's
God of the dead and the living.
Romans 14 and verse 9.
Yeah, and I think it bears reference because he has the keys of hell and death. Now he becomes Lord of also the dead and the living, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's one of my special verses since I found this verse. I never saw it in the Bible until I came to understand this thing, and then it hit me, and it's a part of the arsenal. You mentioned it, Nikki. Here it is in Romans 14 and verse 9. For to this end, or for this reason, Christ both died and rose and revived, in order that, that he might be Lord both of the dead and living. Both, both of the dead and the living. Until he
Amen.
went into the
Amen.
grave, he was not Lord of the dead. In other words, if Jesus came tomorrow, everybody alive who is a Christian would go with him, and everybody dead who was a Christian, they would have remained dead. They would have remained dead. They could not come back from the grave if Jesus had not first died. So the point of the good news is that everything that is ours, Jesus did it first. It exists in Jesus. If Jesus did not do it, you are not entitled to it, because we find this in Christ. Everything we possess is in Christ. This is why Jesus becomes everything to us. He is all in all. When we understand it, you know, you sorry for the poor people who are working their way. Goodness gracious. You sorry for the poor people who are trying to do what has already been done.
David,
Amen.
sorry to be butting in so much, but I
Okay,
find
Nikki.
this very, I find this very amazing because Wayne just remind me of a text which he says he's not like I think in the before Christ died, he said to a group of people, I'm just trying to pick from it, I am not the God of the dead, but of the living. He says, I don't know if you can help me out here.
Yes.
That
It says God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of
but
the
of the
living.
living. But before Christ died. But then after he died, now Romans kicks in, isn't it?
Well, that's a good point. I think it was probably in another context that he was speaking, but I mean, it's still an interesting verse to think about, because, as you say, before Jesus died, he could say, God is not the God of the dead, he's the God of the living. I don't think he was really addressing this issue. I don't think so, to be honest. But at the same time, it's an interesting contrast to what he says here when he says now, Jesus is now Lord both of the dead and the living. It's an interesting contrast, you know. I think the context is a little different, but still, it's an interesting comparison.
That scripture is Mark 12:27. He is not the God of the dead, but of the God of the living. Ye
Okay.
therefore do greatly err.
Thank you, my sister. Mark 12:27. All right. So here he says, and I have the keys of hell and of death. Now, the verse I want to compare here is where Jesus says, let me just find that verse for you. It's in Matthew 16, I believe it is. In Matthew 16, you probably know the verse I'm going to, but let's look for it. In Matthew 16, and is it verse 16? Um, Look at verse 18. Look at verse 18. And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, people, we have misunderstood what this verse is saying, because people believe it means that Satan cannot kill Christians. Satan cannot. Oh, I miss. Right. They think it means that the church cannot be overcome. And maybe this is true. But the point that Jesus was making was that hell cannot hold God's people. So the gates of hell, he's not saying that Christians will not die. He's not saying that the blood of Christians won't be spilled like water. Because it happened, and there are times when it seemed like Satan had gained the victory over the Christian church, like he had wiped out so many Christians, like the church was bound to be destroyed. But what Jesus is saying, look here,
Hold on.
Satan can bring the whole church into hell. All Christians can go into the grave, and
Hold.
it cannot prevail against the church, because God has a way to get the key. And
Great.
that key was when Jesus Christ died, when Satan let in somebody into the grave that was not a sinner. When you put somebody into death who is not a sinner, you cannot hold him in death, because death is for sinners.
Yes.
So Jesus broke out, and when he broke out, he had the victory over the grave, and he's saying, look,
Hallelujah.
now that I'm out of the grave, everybody who died with faith in me is entitled to my resurrection.
Hallelujah.
Yes, sir. Amen.
Hallelujah.
I tell you the truth. When you understand the plan of salvation, when you see, you have to marvel. There's no story that was ever told that is more intricate and beautiful and
Beautiful.
perfectly suited to meet the condition of the human race.
Thank you, Jesus.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Woo.
Praise
Hallelujah.
God.
Yes, indeed.
Praise him.
Praise
Yes.
Hallelujah.
Him.
Amen. So
Amen.
the verse 19 is probably the last verse we'll look at this evening, because it says, "Write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter." So Jesus tells John that he's dealing with the past, the present, and the future. So you have a little bit of this in the book of Revelation, as we have seen. But primarily, most of Revelation is about things which are to come from the time of John, things which are future, right? But why should he write the things which are? Because what John is seeing, the things which are presently, what he's seeing in his vision, they are giving us clues as to how we are to interpret the things which shall be hereafter. So all of the information is to be taken into consideration. We have looked at the next verse. We have looked at that already. And so basically that brings us to the end of chapter 1. Um, we might be a little anxious to get finished with Revelation and move on, but as we can see, when we take the time to look at it verse by verse, word by word, we find that there's a lot of depth of meaning in everything, and we don't want to rush through it.
Don't rush. Don't rush. It's good news.
Indeed, Brother Sam, indeed. But I'm going to stop here for this evening. We have been an hour and 47 minutes already. So I just want to say I appreciate all of you, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for bearing with me. And I'm going to close as soon as you let me know that you don't have any more questions.
Just to thank you. That's all.
All right, Brother Sam. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know where your heart is.